This is The Naked Life with Roxanne Noor. So, the Greeks talk about different ways to learn from life, and one of them is mythos. So this is through the arc of narrative, of storytelling, and seeing life as this story unfolding and the emotions we get from it. And then the other way they learn is through logos, so rationality, logical abilities, and analysis. Today, I want to look at our lives as mythos, as this story, this ability. And in writing, what makes a story interesting is conflict. And in literature, there's 4 different types of conflict. So the first one would be man versus man. This can be the story of someone going against a particular person, maybe a story with my dad who beat me, for example. Not true, just an example. Second one would be man versus nature. You can think of Moby Dick, or you can think of indigenous people going on a vision quest into nature, trying to confront the natural forces, weather, whatever it may be, storms, climate change. And then another story is man versus society. So you can think of someone like Malcolm X, who is facing the US government and the CIA's most wanted list, something like this. So there's man versus man versus nature, man versus society. But the greatest story, supposedly, the story of the masters, the ultimate story is man versus himself. And this is the ultimate story because it creates the foundation of the relationships for the way we frame all other stories in our lives. And you're someone who's very interesting to me because you, on a material plane, have accomplished a lot. You were a professional bodybuilder, naturally vegan, on the Game Changers. You have a TED Talk with 3 million views, many successful businesses, you help people. And then on a spiritual level, to me, just from being your friend, you seem like someone who has a really great sense of beingness. So it's not just the doingness of life, it's not just accomplishing many things. I feel it when I'm with you, the sense of presence, the sense of wanting to enjoy life, to be a part of the mystery. And I feel like these are things that take a lot of wisdom and take a lot of time. So what I would like to know is, what was the main conflict of your life? From these 4 stories, did you start off with man versus man, or has it always been man versus himself? Was it always you against you, the ultimate story? And how do you feel that this story arc or the narrative of your life has changed based on the way you've grown, how you've matured?
First of all, thank you for having me and for that great intro. I really like where this is going already. I definitely would say that the first thing I had was man versus man. It was 4th grade. 3rd grade and 4th grade, I had a very sadistic teacher. His name was Mr. Schneider.
Calling him out.
I remember very good when I already heard about him before I even came, so I had already like a really bad expectation, but he was even worse than I thought. And I was also worse than he probably thought, because I was probably a very anarchistic, a very free-thinking child already through my parents and also my ADD probably. Just the way I grow up, I never took anything for granted or let's say an answer. I just didn't say like, oh, that's how it is. I wanted to know more. So I questioned a lot of the things, and he didn't really like that at all. So I had a very passionate hate about him, and he didn't like me to the point where he started to overstep his boundaries even of what he can do as a teacher. So he bullied me in front of class, and he basically said, as long as I don't do what he wants me to do, he doesn't give me the pause breaks anymore. Like, he didn't let me into the break with the other child. And I remember that was one of the points where I completely escalated, and I took a chair and I threw it at him, and he was able to like defend himself, so I didn't hit him. But after that, I obviously had a big problem And it started to go into the whole like school system. So it was like a woman who came and like wanted to know what's happening. Some of the parents of the other children were like, you're not going to play with this guy anymore. Because I just felt like completely misunderstood, felt misplaced. And so I think that was my first real villain, man versus man, as far as I can say, like on an emotional level, not just on a physical, like I'm going to beat this guy up or whatever. I always had like little fights, school fights, but never like this. So man versus man. And this followed by man versus society for sure. So it was a lot of society questioning the whole system very early on, questioning.
And it feels like, yeah, this thing of obedience in life and how it's an integral part of the education system. And I think I was also very similar to you. I also threw a chair at a teacher.
Already two.
And I was always also kind of the bad girl in school, but always had this quest for knowledge. And there's one side of it which is the curiosity, then there's the other side of it which is just the natural rebellion. Like, I don't take anything that anyone says to me fully because of a lack of trust in basically authority. And it's interesting to watch the way this follows throughout our whole lives. And yeah, the man versus man is definitely a prelude to the man versus society as a whole, to government establishments, to the institutions that run things. And when we're constantly the black sheep, how this creates a sense of maybe isolation and this sense of, not being part of the whole. So when was the point, because of where you've got in your life, I feel like the narrative probably changed and you probably found a way to bring it back. When did the story begin to be you versus you? Like, actually, it doesn't start with the outside establishments. It doesn't start with what my parents did to me. It's actually fundamentally the way I frame my own reality, what I am doing to cause the ripple effects in my life. When was that shift for you?
Pretty sure it was exactly around 19 years old. That's also what I would say, that man versus nature is man versus himself for me, because I consider myself part of nature, and part of human nature is to actually be very biased about his own things. So when I look at that, I would definitely say with 19, I had the first glimpse of like, oh my fucking God, I'm so stupid. Because I remember I was in a train, I had a lot of blood over my face, I was completely wrecked. I had like, I just came from an MRI. Like it was like 6 a.m. in the morning from Zurich to Bern. I had like a lot of like from strangling, a lot of like bruises. Yeah. And so what happened was I was already training back then. I was already into bodybuilding, starting with like some proper strength training. So I was already on this like path of like realizing that there is something called self-reflection, even though back then it was more through a mirror of like, how big am I getting? But still, it almost like emulated this like self-reflection, like through the mirror with my mind too. I'm like, oh, if I train more, I get more results. If I'm training cleaner, I feel better the next day. And if I don't go and drink alcohol, I feel better the next week. So there was already like this like realization of action versus reaction, cause and effect. And I was in that train, so I was going to this like party. I didn't even want to go, but my friend was his birthday, and it was like one of those like really crazy places with a lot of drunk people, like basically like a shabby club. And one of my friends got attacked, and instead of like just seeing the situation as it is, like a lot of drunk people like just like don't really under control, I was like taking it very personally. I'm like, because I was also a little bit I also took a little bit of alcohol, and I basically just pushed the other guy away from my friend, and all of a sudden there was like a bottle on my head, and I saw the guy with the bottle, and I jumped on him and took his throat on the floor. And because when I see red, there's almost like this like switch where it doesn't stop anymore. So the next thing I just remember is like 4 security guys were like joking me, so I let this other guy loose, because I'm almost like putting my thumb into his eye, you know, like literally like I want to kill him, you know, whatever. Anyway, so they pulled me out of the club, completely blood on my face, and the securities strangled me. I had to go to the hospital, and then I came home and I called my mom. I was like, Mom, I'm fucked, you know, can you come and help me a little bit? And then she came. My mom was always really nice to me, but she always there was almost like this little bit of like self-reflection she never gave me of like, you fucked up, you know, like a dad
letting
move.
letting you fall a little bit.
Yeah.
I think moms like to coddle in some
Yeah.
sense. Yeah, it's nice to have the like just the tough love sometimes, like giving it to you as it is.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting. And I just remember when she left, I was home alone and I was thinking about all those assholes. I'm like, those idiots, that just happened because of them. And then all of a sudden, it just like clicked, and I saw myself in my own victim mode, and I was like, no, you are the fucking idiot. You went to this fucking place with people you didn't even want to hang around because they're all drunk. You already know your values, that you don't want to do this anymore. You want to be a professional athlete. So you went there, and then on top of that, you didn't have your own shit under control. And that was the first time I realized I am the problem in this. And that's when I swore to myself I will never have a fight with another guy anymore, which I never had.
Wow.
Even though there were many moments when somebody was like provoking me, or like very situations where people are drunk again. And I always kept it cool. I know exactly how my ego works. And I can literally just like give every guy the space he needs to feel whatever he wants to feel. Like, you know, sometimes guys just need... It's almost like a need to feel like dominating. Like for a lot of guys, it's really important to feel that. So I can really give that to other people now. Like, okay, you want to be the guy? Okay, take it, you know. And since then, it never happened to me again. So, and this was literally the change for me. This was the first time self-reflection actually kicked in, and I realized like, oh, I'm my own biggest enemy here.
Yeah, and it's interesting as you're speaking what's coming up, which is the fact that this self-reflection happened in a point where you said you were alone, right? This happened when you were alone in your bedroom. And this is something that I think is so important for this whole concept Socrates speaks of, like, know thyself. How do we actually know ourselves? And in some way, it is taking space from the external environment and just, even if it's just for a moment, having this aha. And I think it really comes from a place of solitude. And I see trends very often in people who have spiritual awakenings. And I think one of the main things that helps awaken us to the potential of ourselves, to our own patterns, to our own preconceived notions, is coming from this place of like solitude. And in many times it's very dire. So one of my favorite teachers, Sri Aurobindo, he was part of India's liberation movement, actually, and he got thrown into jail because of like his political advocacy. So he was alone in solitary confinement, and he had his spiritual awakening there, which was Source basically telling him, you're not meant to be in politics, you're meant to create the new superhuman in a way. And he created this huge community called Auroville in India, and this changed everything. And even for many of my friends that I know on this island as well, they've had similar experiences. I don't know why it tends to be jail, but maybe because of that fact of like, there is no external stimulation to stop you from this process. And how many times we distract ourselves, we numb ourselves, and then there's no clear seeing. And so this thing you had of just being alone in your room, like actually a nice thing that your mom wasn't there, that your friends weren't there, and that you had this sense of, okay. What do you feel, looking at the contents of your story, of your own narrative arc, what are some things you felt you had to let go of to be reborn? And I think in many myths they have this preconception of you need to die before you die. And the people who really get to taste life have died many times, like many. And a lot of the times it is exactly like, for some people, it is this ego death that you get through psychedelics. For other people, it's more subtle, where an identity that they held on to just doesn't fit them anymore. What are some of your small deaths you've had, and the realizations actually from failures? I think it's really interesting to look at someone like you who is very successful on multiple planes, and to be able to vulnerably speak about the ways that actually, I fucked up and I wasn't right.
Yeah, there's definitely many depths to my story. And usually, like you said, also with the self-reflection, for me, they always happened somehow in a hardship, in a hard moment also. Somehow, I think this is the first time I can actually say that I'm able to change on a proactive level in the last 2 years. Before that, my life was still very reactive most of the time, means that the change came after I fucked up. So now I'm very aware for the last 2 years. I am really sensitive of the values, how I'm actually feeling in the evening. You know, like, did I take care just of my needs? Was I just into like self-love, and sometimes even like malignant self-love, more like this like egoistical self-love? Or do I feel self-respect? Like, do I actually feel like I also was truthful to my values? Because it's sometimes very, very, very close to each other, values and needs, right? And values don't always feel good, but they feel right. And that's where I make the distinction. And I think all of my deaths were basically me being not in congruence, not in alignment with who I really am. So I usually see my old me's or my dead me's as parts of myself who weren't really in alignment with who I really am. The first one was probably at that night, like I said, like this, like, I don't know what I wanted to prove to the world, but it's probably that, oh, I'm also fucking strong. I can also dominate, you know, because back then I wasn't really secure in myself, even though I looked fucking huge and all that shit. But I was still in this, like, I have to prove it to my father. I have to prove it to the world that I'm also whatever. So I was able to let go of that, like idea of who I have to be. I think the second death was in Vegas, actually, when after I won my warm-up contest in 2016. I just had like my pro debut, so I wanted to become a professional natural bodybuilder. That was also the year when I was filming with the Game Changers, and my idea was also to do it for the movie. So I had this whole story in my head for the last 6 years, that I'm gonna like show the world how much you can gain on a natural level without steroids, and also vegan. And it was a good run. But then after I won the warm-up competition, we celebrated it in Vegas for a few days, and I was basically in Vegas and I wasn't able to enjoy anything because I was still prepping. So I was on like 2,000 calories on like 7% body fat. So I was completely like weak and no motivation and basically just training. And then I remember there was like in the morning when I was like sitting in the Venetian in the breakfast buffet and with my friend, and all of a sudden it just hit me like, this is not what you want to do. I realized on a subtle level that bodybuilding is also just a trap. It's like this like self-worth boost, you know, from the outside. Because when I won the competition, the first one, it was not the big competition, but it was the warm-up. I already realized like it's not a sport. Bodybuilding is not a sport. Bodybuilding is a beauty contest. It's basically the hardest beauty contest in the world. You can't win on an objective basis. It's all subjective. So there's 7 people sitting in front of you. You're flexing your muscles, and then they say like, you're the best. And I won. And I didn't feel in any way that I won anything, because I wouldn't even have dinner with those 7 guys. I didn't have any good connection with them. So I was like, huh? You know, it was the first time again where my self-reflection kicked in and realized like, you're doing this for approval of people you don't even like other people who buy expensive shit to impress other people they don't even like. Famous Fight Club quote. And then 2-3 weeks later, I also won the whole thing, and then I also felt nothing, and that was the death of my bodybuilder identity of like, I want to change the world with my body. And I was like, this is all just bullshit, man. You're still not living your true values. There's still more. And then that was basically when I became aware of that, it was basically the pre-version of like this, what I'm doing now is like, I started traveling more. I was like getting into Spanish and like South America. And I also found mushrooms for the first time that year. So that was another death, a big death. And the last really big death was 2 years ago, or like 1.5 years ago. No, basically now more than 2 years ago, when I met another woman while I was just getting engaged. I was just like engaging myself. And 2 months later, I met another woman who mirrored something to me, which I was like, oh, this is there's parts of me I never unlocked. Long story short, I always knew that I'm not 100% into this monogamous construct. I always believed that there's a way of like having both of the same, like the best out of both worlds. But obviously in my last relationship, the woman I was with, she was completely like sold to monogamy. And I was basically trying for a long time to convince her into my way, and she tried to convince me in her way. Then when I met this woman, it was so clear for me that there's so many things I wanted to explore I never explored. And that took me another year to really to realize like, oh, I have to let go of the 6-year relationship. I have to let go of the woman I love most in my life because I love her. You know, like because I love her, I had to go. And this was probably the hardest death so far. It wrecked me. for like 6 weeks. I mean, 2 weeks like intense, and then another 4 weeks where I felt complete surreal, and then another almost like now a year of like just like, yeah, like almost like like who am I really, you know? And like I'm not, right now I'm in the best place ever. I feel like I'm exploring myself. I'm getting truer to myself every day. Life rewards me a lot with those decisions. It almost feels like, oh wow, there's so many gifts out there I never received because I just didn't make the right calls, you know? Yeah.
And it's interesting what you're saying about the parts of yourself that died and what that has to do with. And it's basically who we see as ourselves, and this thing of most of the time identifying with a role. So specifically, you created a persona around being a bodybuilder and then letting go of that, which is actually a huge death, especially when you're public facing with something like this, where there's so much external expectation, gratification, cameras on you. Yeah. And then, I mean, the second largest you pointed out is also relationship. Like, we define ourselves based on who we spend the most time with. And especially if you're monogamous, it's like you're creating a universe of your own with just one other person. Mm-hmm. And so to let go of who you think you are in terms of that specific love is also a huge death. And I think for a lot of people coming out of a relationship, they've actually done studies on the grieving process of relationships, and what happens in the body is the same exact thing that happens in the body when literally someone you love dies.
I heard that.
So losing a fiance is the feeling of her dying in a way, because you're dying too. A new you is going to have to be forced to be born again. And that can either be something that's extremely exciting or something that you grieve, probably both. Something, that also really interests me about you that I feel I lack is watching the way you navigate your life with a lot of structure and discipline. What do you feel in accomplishing dreams and dreams that you see as truly yours? So for maybe sometime the bodybuilder dream really felt like your own until your soul spoke and said, actually, not really. And now it seems like for you, it's helping people, it's the coaching. What do you feel is the relationship you have with self-responsibility and creating a life that makes it easy to achieve your goals? So many people have these dreams that just kind of live within their heads because they're unable to put it into physical reality. What are some tools you use, some mind map? From what you've learned and what you give your students as a coach, what would you say are tools to help achieve dreams in the 3D, in the physical realm?
That's basically the biggest question to ask. It's my favorite question. I can't stress this enough, because values is everything. It's basically this like extension of your soul almost, like, and for a long time I was just like not self-aware enough to realize that, for example, with the bodybuilding thing, there was health on my flag, like the value was health, and subconsciously I realized more and more that even natural bodybuilding is not healthy. It's just not healthy to actually go through the diet and completely. So in a way, I was actually sold. I actually was a bodybuilder until my values started to change. So it's really important to understand that sometimes even something like freedom or love doesn't, all of a sudden the same question requires a new answer. That's when you have a midlife crisis, and some people say you're depressed, but you're actually just like completely reevaluating everything. And the more you go through this without resistance and actually with curiosity, the better. And that's another thing, like after values, I would also just ask people to be way more curious about what they're actually about, you know, and not just in terms of like thinking about it in the head, and like, oh, what could I do? You know, what else could I do? That's never going to happen. You know, you have to actually collect data in the real world by actually trying things. Like right now with the podcast, you're actually recording a podcast now, several, right? And that's how you actually start to understand, is this something I really feel? Because it's really easy to just get involved in fall in love with an idea without really knowing what are the requirements to get to this goal. You know, like if you just think like, oh, this is a nice idea, but you never reverse engineer the process, you will never know if you actually really like the idea, like do you actually want to accomplish that, or if you just
It's a fantasy, like almost
Yeah.
idealism. Yeah.
And that's most of the things now when I have dreams, like you said, I first reverse engineer them and I realize, oh no, that's just somebody on Instagram who lives that life. And I actually would hate my life if I would actually,
Yes.
So most people compare themselves way too much instead of being curious about their own experience. So I would say go out and experience life and just see life as a teacher, like a real world. And all of a sudden things will start to make more sense.
And this thing in that everything that happens to us is material for self-understanding and on the path to self-actualization. Every single thing that happens to us is something that we can use. And also thinking about values, it's interesting to think of the whole scope of our lives. And so for me, one of my main values is freedom. And then you have to define it for yourself, not the way that society or other people describe freedom, but really what is freedom specifically for you and what does it feel like? And so much of my youth was just a lot of running around and creating. So from like a super young age, I loved to just make weird music videos and I loved to just write in my journal in the forest where I grew up and just have this running barefoot, being in my own head, free, not doing anything for anyone else.
Yeah.
And it's so funny to watch myself 20 years later doing the same exact thing, running around barefoot, still making music videos, producing things, writing, and to see that I'm doing it for myself and this aspect of what freedom actually means, which is not playing by somebody else's rules and still the sense of wandering through life, not being rooted in one place. And so it's interesting to study the contents of our own lives. I was connected to what I wanted from such a young age, and going back to that place, if money didn't matter, if external recognition didn't matter, what would I still be doing no matter what? And how that goes into our vocation.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point you're just pointing out, because I can actually even give you a little bit of context for your own self-understanding. So the first thing I just want to make sure is that people understand that freedom can only be a value if you know what you want to be free for. Because if you want to be free from, that's not a value, that's just reactivity. It's just like running away from responsibility. But real freedom comes from self-responsibility, and therefore also choosing for what cause do you actually want to be free. So it's really important to liberate yourself by deciding that, to actually make a decision, because to have the choice is freedom, but to actually make a decision, that's liberation. That's when you literally realize like, oh wow. And some people do it through like monogamy, like I said, like this one partner for the rest of my life, I don't question it anymore. I did it with my purpose, that's where I just feel like that makes so much sense. And when I listen to you, you come from the complete other spectrum than me. You seem to have like a very feminine core. So the beautiful thing about the feminine, from what I can see, is that you're so in your intuition, you're so into your feelings, that it's really easy for you to also then love something and then just devote yourself into it without even questioning value or like reason. It's just like, I fucking want to do this. And sometimes that's when I see women actually become crazy millionaire and entrepreneurs, are because they were so in love with their own with that one cookie, and all of a sudden it blows up. You know how sometimes women do something like their own face cream, and all of a sudden a guy comes, hey, we can actually scale this shit, and then it goes through the roof. So I think a lot of women, when they're like very devotional, very in their feminine core, and very intuitive, they don't really think about, does that make sense? Does it scale? They're not into that business mode, and they put all their love into this one project. And if you actually have the right timing, a lot of luck comes on it. You need the right people, or they just see your product and they love their product. For example, when I love a product, I always tell the person, hey, go for it, like do this. And that's where I feel like I come from the complete other side, with values, with awareness, with what's my why? Why am I doing this? It has to make sense. So it's a very intentional way of living. And for me, the hard part is devotion. It's actually like completely blindly, just like almost like giving myself to something without, wait, does that make sense? Is that smart? I can trust in life as long as I have reason. But then when it comes to like really love, You know, it takes a lot to actually open the heart and then to vote. So for you, you could probably start to work more on like this awareness of leverage and seeing it, actually like seeing it in front. And my biggest leverage is to be more in my feeling and more into my intuition, and therefore more able to also just channel that without always having to have the reason. So it's if you really want to play the game of life fully, you have to integrate both parts.
It's interesting because I feel there are different approaches that are innate to nature, but also to the way life responds to us. And all the times where I watch that myself, when I think about a lot about meaning of life and why and whatever, is when I'm not actually immersed in it. The fact that I have to question it means that something is questionable in my life. And all the times I'm in complete, this is a nice word, in complete devotion. My other value is beauty. And so the freedom of life is from the beauty of just experiencing it without the why, without needing to profit from it or do whatever. And what I've noticed is the more I'm in this devotion to beauty and in my innate freedom is exactly what you said, where someone else will come into the picture and be like, oh wow, this is the strategy, this is the structure. And it's almost like a symbiosis of working together. And the way I see it for people who are structured more like me is like this picturing of sharpening your sword. And to me, there's no luck in life. I don't think there's anything as luck or coincidence or chance. I think there's patterns that we can't recognize and things happen to us that our cognition cannot grasp. But all the times I'm really devoted and I'm pushing past self-doubt, pushing past my perfectionism, still writing every day. And with this feeling of not focusing on the end goal, which can sometimes plummet me more into things like doubt or questioning. But really this aspect, that what's coming up for me is trust. And if I'm trusting that just every day I'm sharpening my sword, no matter what I'm writing, I'm producing things, and I don't know what's going to happen for sure. I don't have this end goal. Every single time something will manifest. And I think the main thing with devotion or just being good at anything is just showing up for it no matter what. And it's nice to frame it in this thing of devotion instead of discipline. I think there's a hardness and a rigidity to discipline, and this thing of like, I need to do because it's going to bring me this amount of money and this is why. When I can, core component of the feminine is this aspect of surrender, and this is something I feel I've really integrated into my own life. When I can trust in just the moment that I'm showing up in this moment as present as I can. And you brought up awareness before, and I think it's integral for every single person to have this field of wanting to understand and how the inner and the external landscape speak and have this dialogue with one another through our awareness. To just trust that when I'm showing up, things will work out for me, and it always has.
Yeah, it's like I said, I don't want to even try to say you need one or the other. It's like literally you have to integrate both to a certain extent. I don't have to even say that everybody's goal should be 50-50. I think a really important tip for people listening is to understand that every strength is in another context a weakness, and every weakness in another context is a strength. So for example, like curiosity in certain jobs, they really want that. And if you're a very curious person, you will actually have a lot of success. But if you want to be an accountant in Germany, if you're too curious, they're probably going to fire you because they don't want to let you ask, why do we do this? So there's everything, even like something like cautiousness. Like my business partner, Christian, is super cautious. I'm the opposite. I'm not really cautious. I usually go for it right away. And he's like very looking at it, analyzing it, So sometimes when I work with people and one of their main strengths, character strengths, is cautiousness, they're like, what the fuck? Why? I don't want to be cautious. I'm like, hey, this is actually really important for people like me. So to understand exactly like the masculine needs the feminine, people need each other.
Yes.
We can actually be complemented by other, like complementary. So I would consider myself 70-80% masculine. So for me to have like somebody with a higher feminine trait is really important. So I don't have to always have a reason. Like I said, I can actually also be a little bit more loving, and you have maybe some people who can actually give you a little bit more of this like trust. So you don't know, direction. And I mean, for example, Gabor Mate has this very, very good quote. I really like it. The road to hell is not paved by good intentions. That's the quote everybody's saying. The road to hell is paved by no intention. And I think if you have no intention and there's no goal, you basically don't even know anymore if one of your actions are serving you or not. At some point it gets very fuzzy and you don't really know where you're at, where you're going. And I had this phase too after I met this woman who basically gave me this like glimpse into like, man, you're way too much intentional, way too much on your just discipline, just like I said. And then I went into the other extreme just to see how it is. And I actually felt it was a very dark place to just like see people in Tulum completely with no intention, you know, they just like go with the flow and just like live, wake up somewhere. And like I said, it could also just be my perspective from a very becoming mindset. Like you said, I'm learning how to just be more by being. Like yesterday I had a complete flow state day, but I was still deciding to have that flow state day. If I go to Burning Man, it's almost like this like container of craziness, and I'm basically going there for 7 days, and I know exactly that I can do whatever I want there, but it's still contained into like a beginning and an ending. So I think that the really important thing for us is to just see, where are we on the spectrum? Are we more intuitive? Are we going more with the flow? Are we more this awareness, super like want to see everything, understand everything, you know, and then just find people who are on the other side to actually balance us out, and not to see our weaknesses as weaknesses, but actually see every weakness also as a strength, and every big strength potentially also as a weakness. And that's where Martin Seligman brought up with his book, Authentic Happiness, really good. So he says that if you do the things you're naturally good at, which we have natural tendencies. So it's almost like if you're a fork and you try to cut a bread, it's just going to be frustrating. And so many people, they're in a job where it's not even that the company maybe has shitty values, maybe that too, but sometimes it's not even the company the problem or the boss. It's more that they never really understood that they're not the fork, that they're actually a knife, and they're just trying to cut the bread for the last 15 years. And if you have something where you're good at and people actually see you, they're like, oh, wow, you know, I love that you're so cautious. Oh, I love that you're so authentic. In other jobs, authenticness is not good. If you're a cop, you have to wear a uniform. You have to basically be a cop. You can't be yourself, you know? So even authenticity in certain jobs is not what is good. So if you're like me and you need to be yourself, I wouldn't be a good cop or even a good actor maybe, because I don't like to act. You know, it's not my strength to act somebody I'm not. I think it's really important to understand that you basically have, and that sounds so cheesy, but everybody has a strength. And the only thing they want is to be seen. My biggest, if you really want to be happy, just read that book or just go with that. There's a character test too, where you can do it. It's like 24 character strengths, and I think it's a really good one.
So what are your main values, and how did you come into contact with these values? How did you know for sure these are my values?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like you said, freedom is basically that thing which, when I reflect my whole life, I can always say that there was something freedom involved. Even when I started watching movies with my dad, one of the movies he showed me when I was like 7 or 8 years old was Braveheart. I don't know if you remember the scene, the last one, but he basically didn't drink the fucking sedative. He got basically tortured without the anesthesia, but the queen wanted to give him the anesthesia, but he impregnated the Queen of England, and he was like a Scottish rebellion, and then she was trying to help him that he can die at least easy, and he was like, no, I'm not going to drink it. And then at the end the king basically says, if you obey now, I'm going to kill you fast. And he's like, his last words were basically like, freedom. And then he just gets fucking tortured, you know. So that's still in me. So freedom is a big one for me. Like
and I think actually it's interesting to watch the way how we grew up indoctrinates our sense of values. And I also feel like it was interesting growing up in both the East and the West, and really more in the West, more in around New York City, and how just this aspect of freedom is so strong. But you you look around and most people are really not free. And this goes actually in a way into your brand, the Chainless Life. In order to be chainless, you must first realize the ways in which you're chained. And Gurdjieff talks about this, like a prisoner can't escape the prison if he doesn't know he's in a prison.
Yeah.
And so in order for us to be free, what are the chains that are holding us down? And oftentimes we're always putting it on the environment. What are the chains we have within our own minds that are keeping us locked and stagnating in one place?
The fear of responsibility. Because even if I open the cage for people and show them that they're in a cage, they're like, but if I go out of the cage, it's dangerous out there, right? And I'm like, yeah, it is. And they're like, oh. And then they think, and yeah, maybe next year. So it's the fear. It's obviously comes from the fear of death, like the most ontological fear there is.
Yes.
But fear of death also means fear of life. It's the same thing. And that's what I never understood until I actually really became like, I started to read that shit, you know, like Paul Tillich, like The Courage to Be. It's like a 130-year-old book, but he basically writes it down perfectly. And yeah, the fear of responsibility for your own life and actually taking responsibility for everything, even what we just talked before we started the podcast, even to realize that you were a victim one day and to accept that you didn't choose the way you grew up and you were helpless. Yeah, you were a victim. But then what does that mean? So instead of asking the question, why, the question is, what for? What for? That brings you into the future, not just why, but actually, so, okay, what now? You know, what am I doing with this? And that's where values actually come from, is to realize what is really valuable. You know, like I hate people when they talk about their cheesy values, or every company now has like their like values, and it's always the same shit, you know. But the best values are actually the ones you're fighting for with other people. It's values are actually separating you from others. It's a masculine thing. Like needs are beautiful because we basically can come closer.
We have fundamentally almost the
same needs. Yeah. We can actually talk about our needs, and nobody can tell me, oh no, your need for safety is shit, or you need for touch and then like closeness. No, we all have it. It's just
human, yeah.
Yeah, so they connect us, but on the same times, when we're just thinking about our needs, they are also dividing us because we become very egocentric, right? And with values, it's almost like the opposite. It's like they split us. So I have safety as a value, not just as a need, but also as a value. That's why I'm for the vaccine. That's why I'm for the masks. That's why I'm for the lockdown. And then you have another person who values freedom and says no.
Bodily sovereignty, yeah.
Yeah, and then you have a clear separation.
Yes.
And on the other hand, what values do is they actually bring you closer to the people which value the same thing.
Yes.
So one of my biggest values next to freedom and self-responsibility and
authenticity, yes,
is Wertschätzung, like basically the valuing. You know, like valuing the same things with other people. Like the world could be so much easier if everybody would live the way I live, basically. Okay, maybe not, but in a sense of like choosing the people you want to hang out with proactively based on values, you know? Like, why should I discuss with somebody who has not the same values for 3 years, make a discussion with them? I feel like the world is very big and we all could easily start to just like build, instead of just countries, we should just build like value systems.
I mean, the countries, in a way, are value systems, and different countries have their own essence. And so, for example, the United States does have this sense of, freedom in a way. It has the individuality. Spain is more about the love of life, the relaxation. France is more about rebellion. They have different essences.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it's too big, and we have no fundamental agreements.
Yeah.
So, for example, the United States, part of the polarization is the fact that we can't agree what is a fundamental truth in life. And it is because of the different value system. But I would disagree with most of what you just said, because I think for us to actually learn in life, we need people who can confront us and challenge us in order for us to know what our values are. Our values aren't really our values unless they're being tested in the face of challenges, confrontation. Like this saying, put your skin in the game. You don't know what actually matters to you until it is fully tested, and there will be repercussions, and there will be things that actually happen with you standing firm ground. And I think when I was younger, I had this natural inclination, as you're speaking right now, to just want to be around people who are similar to me and just, in value system and the way they do life. And it becomes an echo chamber of information. And we're just all regurgitating the same thing. But I would say what's interesting is having people who can challenge you, seeing the commonalities, because there's always commonalities. And I think what you're speaking to is, and I feel it in myself we both live in this very small kind of conscious spiritual community on this island. Most of us, not all of us, most of us here do have a very common value system, and it makes life easier. Yeah, it makes life easier. It makes life more cohesive. There's more harmony. And so I think really political systems are failing because the systems are too big. We need to go back into localization, kind of the way we're living right now, having really small communities where people value the same things.
Yeah, value tourism. That's what I meant when I was saying most people should live a life like I do, because I didn't complain about Switzerland or Germany. I just actually traveled and found people where I don't have to complain all day. Yeah. And what you said is true. Don't get me wrong. I think we should be challenged, but I think inherently it should come from within us. So one of my biggest values in my company, we have 3 values. We have the first one is Wertschätzung, which basically means that you value other people, but you can only do that if you have the same values. Otherwise, it's really hard to value other people's values if they don't have the same, because you're almost like creating a dissonance, it's almost like what happens in the States now, where people are like, oh, it's good for you, and everybody's like politically correct.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, I like to be at a place where people understand where I'm coming from. And you said the word harmony. Harmony is the basis for growth. People can't grow, people can't actually strive for more if they're not in harmony. So first we actually have to find people. Like Burning Man is a really beautiful place to actually grow, because you have a value system which completely it brings you into love, even not even harmony, brings you into love and synchronicities. And I learned so much in a week in Burning Man that I was able to actually challenge from there my own beliefs, and actually realized that I was able to grow way better than in constant conflict and constant change. So I know what you mean when you say it's important to have people which are basically like challenging you, but I still feel it's way easier if you at least respect other people's values. You can at least respect them. And for that, you have to have people which are true to themselves. Like basically they are already separated from everybody. They made their way through individuation, how Freud would say, to actually be individual. And through a strong individual, you create a strong society.
Yeah.
And most people try to do it the other way around. A strong society, and then, how do we do it? Even the States, the United States, it's a better example than Europe. Europe completely failed with their, let's just make the EU, like you said, there's so many different varieties. But even the States used to be different. It used to be 50 different states, right? And then they said, like, let's do the United States. Right. So it's still hard for those 50 states to be one fucking country, in my opinion. In Brazil, it was the opposite way around. There was one big fucking country, and then they realized, fuck, we're too big. Let's make states. So that's why the countries, even there it's divided, but it's a little bit less crazy than in the States, because they at least were one country once.
Yes.
So yeah.
And I think this lack of harmony, it's funny because when I do go back to the States, and I went about 9 months ago, and in the beginning it was really amazing. I actually loved it. And towards the end of my trip, I was in Oakland, and I realized that in order for me to feel harmony, I have to feel that there is a not giving way to my environment when I don't want to. And an example of this was in Oakland, I was doing a DMT ceremony for myself. And what I realized from all the times that I've had the most profound experiences on DMT, it's when I am in complete harmony with my environment. And many of my other times doing it, I was by the ocean, I was under the full moon, I was in an environment where I felt very safe. And so my ego was able to just give way and let go. And in Oakland, when I was doing the ceremony, it was in an apartment. I heard the traffic outside. I heard the shouting of homeless people. The external environment was so strong that I had no ability to fully surrender. And I realized that so much of the way we are living in America, I fundamentally just don't agree with. It was, as you said, the value system is different. And I see the way people are so coerced by fear. And it felt like, how can I live in a place where actually most of us do have enough? We're made to think that we don't. Instead of loving your neighbor, like afterwards I went to Turkey, there's a sense everywhere I go I'm being invited inside people's homes. There's this feeling of community, of openness, of hospitality. And in the United States there's a lot of this guarding because of heavy private property, because of the fear culture, and the environment was too strong, and it was shaping me through my most malevolent sides, through the sides of me that have greed, that need to feel I need to protect and I need to keep what's mine. And I felt exactly what you're saying, like the values that I was being confronted with were really not my values, and they were too strong for me to live from a place of pure authenticity. And so yeah, I was like, 3 months here is great. I'm leaving because this isn't the way I want to fully live my life. And when I am fully one with my environment, how easily it is to surrender. And it makes sense why monks go into the mountains where they can just be alone and the environment is so nourishing. And they're able to speak to source and divinity because they are one with the environment, with nature.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's literally exactly what I also think when I hear that. Is like, you know, it's not even that I can't understand people with different values. I can actually understand every person, because values are completely subjective. They don't have anything to do with reason. Like, I don't even know why I value what I value. I never chose to value what I value. I would even go as far. But to actually respect people, I have to at least feel that if they're valuing something completely different than me, that there is reason involved in their values, like that they're actually able to express their values through a sense of reason. And I think that's where reason is really important, because it's a human trait, right? It's like this, like, oh wow, we can actually, we don't have to be rational, but we have to be at least be reasonable. I think that's a better term. And reason is really important for me to convince me that I can completely disagree with something but still completely respect you, you know. And the people I share the same values, that's the people I love usually. It's like, oh man, we don't even have to fucking say anything anymore. We're just there. It's a feeling. It's like, it's synchronicity. It's the same when, it's actually funny when you say you smoke DMT and you're in tune with your environment, you become one, like, easy, right?
Yeah.
It's like the person, you hug this person, and it's there. Yeah. And then there's other people, you smoke DMT around those people, you fuck. Like, no, I don't want to kind of be one with this fucking energy here. This energy field is fucked. So I really felt it was a really nice metaphor.
Yeah. And because, it's funny because there is this dichotomy and this thing of the inner world is being reflected in the external world constantly. And it's kind of vice versa, but sometimes really environment is too strong. What surprised me about going back to New York City, while I was on this island, I was having so many nightmares about going back to New York, like sitting on the subway, seeing like this ghost-like faces of everyone. They all hate their lives. Everyone riding from 9 to 5, just this feeling of misery. And when I went back to New York, it was the opposite. I was like talking to strangers on the subway, laughing, dancing salsa on the subway, like doing feeling like, wow, this place changed so much because I changed so much. And my ability to play with the environment and to kind of be adaptable and dance around it and take the parts of it that I do love. And cities are beautiful places. It's epitome, it's apex of human brilliance, of culture, of history. And so I was taking the parts I loved from it, but the parts I didn't like, just over time, I was noticing what it was doing to my persona. And I was like, this is so unhealthy. And so there is a question of, how do we want to shape our lives in accordance to our values? And how can I be free, like actually free, if I feel no aspect of safety? At the time I was living near Section 8 housing in the ghetto, and this thing of having to be hyper vigilant, watching every move you do, this feeling of never being able to relax, how bad that is also for your nervous system, for the things that you try to change, but it's the body.
Yeah.
That was another question I was going to have for you, actually, which is quite beautiful, is because you've worked so much in your body, you have a lot of companies around nutrition, you were a bodybuilder, you're vegan. What do you feel is the relationship between the body and the mind? And how do you see its convergence in your life and having a life of mental well-being and physical well-being?
Yeah, I mean, obviously through a lot of spiritual practices, I came to the understanding that the mind and the body are basically not really separated, basically the same thing. And I feel like all the contractions in my body are basically a contraction in my mind. Like every thought is an emotion. Sometimes I have an emotional breakthrough and I don't even know what actually happened, but I just feel clear in my head. So sometimes something dissolves physically, and almost like one coin, two different sides, right? Like thought and emotion. And with nutrition as well, it's like, for me, it was the same moment when I had self-awareness about health is when I started to eat healthier. It's almost like this comes back to like your needs and self-love and like self-respect, you know. It's like really valuing what you value. And I mean, I met people who say, I don't value health. I like to smoke cigarettes and I don't fucking care. And they're true to their values, and that's how they look. You know, they look like, okay, enjoyment, comfort, whatever, you know. It's really not that easy to just say like there's good values or there's bad values. It's literally just like every human being has a different fate, right? Like a different way how life is playing that human, almost like you as a vessel gets played like an instrument by life. And sometimes I'm not even there to judge that anymore. But for me, the mind and the body is one thing, and every decision a person makes shows me something about their inner world, and everything this person has in their inner world will at some point manifest in the outer world. Obviously, there is, since I'm very into materialistic scientific literature when it comes to like nutrition and all those things, I still don't want to like completely neglect problems like cancer and say like it's all psychological. Animals in nature can also get cancer, right? It's very unlikely because they usually get killed before they get old enough to get cancer. So you don't see it as often as domesticated dogs. But even cancer is something so in evolution, it's almost like necessary for evolution. So there's still things we don't really understand. So I don't want to like completely new age this whole discussion about body and mind and say like, yeah, if you have cancer, something is wrong with your mind. You know, it's the same as this example of free will, where there's like this one guy who kills like 15 people from a roof with a sniper rifle, and everybody thinks like he's the biggest monster. But then they find his letter, and he kills himself at the end. And then they find his like goodbye letter where he says, hey, just that you know, I don't know what happened, but in the last 6 months I had like voices in my head started telling me that I have to do this, what I did. I'm really fucking sorry that I did it, but I couldn't do anything else. It was literally like fucking like killing me, and please just make sure that they know what happened to me. And then they actually made a
scan of his brain,
and they found a big tumor which was actually growing into exactly the field of behavior where that actually changes, you know, where you can actually become schizophrenic and shit. And somebody who kills 15 other people, in that perspective, he didn't really want to do that. It was something physical in his brain growing, making him do that. And, you know, for me, it's just crazy, you know, to actually acknowledge that everything is just fucking happening. I can basically just allow it, observe it, and enjoy it. You know, like allow, observe, enjoy. That's my mantra usually for being. You know, and that's what I also like about, because you also mentioned Socrates, you know, Socrates. In the Eastern philosophy, it's all about being and the inner science and like being in yourself. So that's when you look at Confucius and all the first philosophers in the East, it makes so much sense how everything became the way it is with Buddhism and Tantra and all inner science. But through Socrates, through the Bible and God, Wissenschaft means so science in German means Wissenschaft, which basically means you create knowledge. And Western medicine and all the fucking technology we have came from the Western thinking like
Of
Socrates.
doing, yes.
So when I think about God, I feel like God is like there is actually non-duality. Like I really believe in non-duality and being and just resting. But I feel like that's exactly where God was, and at some point he was like, and now what? Let's become, like I'm being now here, and that's how I feel about my own existence. I'm like, I can be in a Vipassana for 10 days, but then eventually something says, hey, let's just see what else. And then duality happens, like, okay, becoming up and down, light and dark, and then good and bad. And then that's how you start to dance in the game of life. So I feel like the more we integrate all those different like realizations about truth, like truth is so crazy, right? Like, what is truth, right? It's like, and I think truth always comes from basically the first people who were able to speak truth into existence in a weird way, because that's how it shaped our thinking.
First there was the word.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when I look at the Eastern and Western philosophy, it's like the opposite. Like one is top to bottom, the other is bottom to top. One, like Vipassana is like the fucking millimeter, like you Vipassanalize to the smallest fucking quantum you can have, and then realize that there's nothing, and that's God, and
that the nothing actually holds everything.
Yeah.
And then that the nothingness is the pure potentiality.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's really interesting about where East and West can meet, because it seems like they're just so polar opposites. This sense of why we have duality, because when we then remember the non-dualism, it just feels so sweet. And so this thing of being able to be thoroughly in the game of life, be in the material world, the physical matter in the body, but then to realize that that's not it. And I think that's why a lot of Westerners suffer way more than Easterners from sense of depression and
just
anxiety.
becoming.
Just doing, and you're just on this hedonic treadmill of doing, and there's no sense of beingness, there's no sense of processing, there's no sense of feeling the innate aliveness of each moment if you're just on to the next. And so there's beauty in both. It makes me sad looking at even like beautiful beings like the Dalai Lama and what's happened to Tibet. And it's just like completely overtaken by China. And the sense of like, when you love something, the West has a lot of this conquer ship mentality, but at the sense of when you love something, there is a part of you that fucking fights for it. And this was my main realization from watching Avatar 2. When you really love something, there is the doingness that comes out of this ability to fight for what you love, and the spirit actually of the warrior, of I'm not going to remain complacent. And so it's interesting because I feel like a lot of the way we react to life is exactly that. It's reactivity instead of being proactive. And the way this comes out into society, where we can't catch the warning signs quick enough because we just don't care. There's this state of apathy. And then once something is really bad, then everyone's protesting it, fighting for it. Yeah, reactive. But if we are involved in something, if we understand what's going on in ourselves, in the political system, if there's some sense of curiosity, we can catch the warning signs fast enough. And then we don't even need to fight for it. And it goes to the point you were speaking about before, and this is the way I've seen my own progress of my life, is when I am really attuned to what is going on in myself, when I'm paying attention and I'm working on myself, like proactively working on myself, there are no mistakes. Yeah, there are literally no mistakes. When I was a teenager, it used to feel like, why is the world attacking me? Why is everything so hard? And it was all just like, wake up, wake up, wake up. And we need mistakes in order to teach us. But when we get to this place of actively working on ourselves, which then helps us work on the system as a whole, on being in relationship with other people, being involved in things, there's less mistakes naturally. And how to get to this place of non-reactivity in the state of being proactive, it comes back to awareness.
Yeah, it comes back to awareness. And I just want to also, I have a lot of compassion for the fact I'm going to mention now. So it's not that I'm saying that this is, I laugh about it. I take it with a little bit of humor, but it's the fact that we're basically just a little bit further than an ape, right now at this state of our life. So the human being, I think 5% of the human population actually thinks about the shit we're thinking, you know, like in terms of like awareness and consciousness.
Because it's a privilege to be able to think about awareness and consciousness when there's survival mode. And I think as Westerners, we forget about like it's something like 40% of the world doesn't even have clean water to live off of. And there's no being able to give room to these parts. Continue.
Yeah, it's exactly what you mean. It's like most people are not, and even the people, you can also just look at Germany and just talk with 10,000 people and look how many actually ask themselves those questions versus which goes home.
Linear model of life,
And this is actually pretty, I had a very interesting podcast with Sven Gaborjanski, which is like he's a scientist for the future. So he has like models of how to look at the future. And he says that there's only like a few percent of people who actually are responsible for the consciousness shift in the world. And the 95%, they never think about it. They just adapt. And that makes a lot of sense to me. And you can say it's privilege. I would say a part of it is definitely can also be privilege because obviously survival mode is a real thing and I know how it feels. And also, like I said, I think survival mode also means a lot of times that people are, and that's a taboo, but if you have a certain IQ or not, you don't have a certain IQ, it's actually really hard to survive nowadays. It is what it is. And even in the States, there's people, they don't even find a job as a janitor for free just because they're not manageable with their IQ. So those are the questions obviously I'm not able to solve. I don't know what should we do with pedophilias or with people with such a low IQ that we basically have to as a society take care of them, you know. It's the same with like people, like there is just like those questions nobody really has a real solution for and everybody's just winging it. So that's where I have a lot of compassion for those people as well as the people around those people as well as the society who has to almost like manage it. And I always bring it back to awareness again, like how much awareness do we have for the complexity of life? How much awareness do we have that we're basically just apes with a little bit of self-awareness, and that either we should have a little bit less brain mass, that we don't destroy everything, or we should have a lot more. I don't know where we should go with this, but it feels like we're in this place where it's just very interesting. And that's where, for example, for me, plus compassion comes to like, I don't know if you know about like absurdism,
Yes,
but
course.
it's like, sometimes I laugh about it too. I'm like, this is just absurd, you know, like, Elon Musk buys Twitter and this happens and crazy fucking shit, you know, and you're like, what's next? You know, like nothing can surprise me at this point anymore. And that's where I'm like a little bit like also, yeah, okay, you know, it's life. And then again, allow it, observe it, enjoy it as long as you can. You know, it's also just a ride at the end of the day, you know, and we're all having suffering included in our packages anyway. Maybe we have a fucking privilege to grow up in Switzerland or whatever, you know, like
It's a different type of suffering.
Yeah.
And I think actually with the way we grew up in our Western more cushioned lives, it demands different things. And it does demand that we ask the bigger questions because yes. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If I'm able to live, I have food, I have security, I have a roof over my head. Okay, next need. And so even us before having this conversation about polyamory, most people wouldn't even think about that because it's like, all I want is security.
Yes.
I want someone to just live with, where I can build a nest, where I can be safe because external environment is strong
Beautiful.
and scary. And and we have in some way like the miracle of being able to question these things. How do I want to love? How can I make these choices? And it's interesting, and I was thinking about this the other day, how we are one of the first generations to grow up without catastrophe. So our grandparents survived World War II and being blown up by bombs and being divided by war. And we're in this place where most of the warfare is happening in our own minds. There's not hardcore need for survival because we're not being bombed, food isn't being rationed. And so then the way we relate to life is completely different. And there's been many studies with this, even in terms of the way we love based on where evolution is at. And there was this one study done where it basically said because infant mortality was so high at one stage, family structure was not strong because of it. So there were so many children, we didn't take the child seriously until age 7, because before that, it was basically considered like a fetus. It's the way we would consider a fetus now. Like, your chance of dying is so high, I'm not going to get emotionally attached to this child. And then once infant mortality rate started to decline, there was more of a question of like, oh, a child is a real thing. I want to make a child with someone whose genes I want so we can construct this nuclear family. And the way we loved was in accordance to that. So it was more about let's not just reproduce, but let's have more consciousness. Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense, though.
Yeah, and this is always happening with the way things are. Even during the 1930s, 40s, in a lot of media, it was not the way we react to romanticism now, which is about the mystery, uncertainty. How much do you love me? How long will you love me? Oh, wow. Yeah. It was really about like this thing, and we're just creating something that is nuclear and safe because, we're living in times of war and destruction, and we need each other, like more than we need each other now. And we see it now with Gen Z. Gen Z is very interesting to me. So I'm on the cusp of Gen Z. I'm 1 year after. So I'm, like right
You're
there.
You're basically Gen Z.
So I'm basically Gen Z. And so Gen Z grew up by age 12. No, actually even before, with social media. And not social media like, you and me connecting with each other, but social media where there was threads where I can speak to someone else speaking about Obama, speaking to someone else, where there's the like button, where it's not about me and you communicating, but it's about me going viral and communicating with the masses. And what this has done to Gen Z's consciousness is just, it's so big. The information age has made it so large where there's this questioning of so much. And we see this, many people will call them lazy, like, they don't want to work these jobs. They don't want to work bullshit. And they saw the way that before, because of the housing market crash, and so many things that happened in America, there's no clear ground, there's no promises. So why am I giving my life to this corporation when they could just use me as a commodity? And there's these questioning of bigger things the more we have access to.
Yeah, distrust in institutions. That's
huge.
What it comes down.
And I mean, it was a huge facet of coronavirus, of the fact that people know they're being lied to, and the way that we're being so manipulated based on our own fears, and the censorship that's happening in media and many other things. So really everything comes back to how safe we can feel in ourselves, and the way it goes back to the beginning of the conversation, the way which we relate to ourselves, and how easy we're being coerced by other people. And that comes back to, how we feel about life as a whole.
Yeah, so a strong self. It's literally what sets you free is the understanding what is in your control and what is not. And I personally, for me, I can say, if let's just assume I have a free will for a moment.
Probably not.
Then
this is another discussion.
then I can say at least my decisions are under my control, right? And the reactions to my emotions are under my control. My emotions are not under my control, but how I react to the emotion, I can actually work on that this is in my control. And also how I think about the things that happen to me, that's also something I have in my control. And when I really focus on that, then I can actually realize, okay, there is a few things, and that makes me safe to know that, okay, I can choose, I can make decisions, I can think about the things that happen to me. Okay, maybe somebody cheats on me, somebody steals me money, I can still react in a way. And when people are giving the locus of control outside, so for example, I really want you to like me. I'm actually idealizing you. You're so hot, and I actually want me to like you. In that moment, I basically give off all my power to you. And that makes me feel unsafe. And it's the same with the government. So the only thing I can't control if you are liking me, if you're going to judge me, if you're going to reject me. But what I can choose, and that's for maybe to sum this up, what I can choose is for what you will reject me for. I can choose for what you will be rejecting me That's my values. And if we're not on the same ground, then I can say, okay, that's good. Like we're actually not on the same ground. And that gives me a good feeling again, even if I'm rejected. I'm like, oh, I'm too big for you. I have too much muscles. Actually, I love my fucking body. I chose to go to the gym, have a goal, have a purpose for it. And I understand that you want somebody else, So, and the same with the government. Like I never had the feeling of unsafety because I knew it's like a restaurant, If you don't like how you get treated, you go somewhere else. And it's the same with countries. If I feel like a country takes too much taxes of me and I have like nothing, I feel like, in return, and they only support the dairy farmers and give my money to the military, I'm like, no, I don't want that. I'd rather go to Costa Rica where there's no military, for example. I'd rather buy a house here where corruption is more obvious and people think like, oh, it's so corrupt, but corruption is actually affordable here. I say it like that. In Switzerland, corruption is so high up there, or like maybe not in Switzerland. It's probably one of the less corrupt countries, but in a lot of countries, you just don't see corruption.
It's just more sophisticated and more subtle, which makes it more difficult to deal with. So
yeah, just what is in your control. And if you can every day make sure that you know what is in your control.
The thing is, to bring it back to the concept too of free will, most things aren't in our control because most of our thoughts are just happening to us from the environment. We're not controlling it. But going back to what you're speaking of, which is like an optimistic, nice view of it, is I can control which thoughts I attach to more and which thoughts I'm just not going to engage with or go into a downward spiral. Just observe.
Just observe. Anicie.
Just observe. And so... okay, I'm controlling nothing. This is my view of it. I am not in control, actually. There is a higher intelligence that is dictating something, and I will probably never understand it. And that's the mystery. I fucking love it. It's great. What I can work with is how I am framing reality. And that is it's from the thoughts that I'm interacting with most, which are then dictating the emotions, which are then dictating my belief system. And it's nice to be in this thing of holding nothing like heavily. Like I don't want to cling too hard to one thing. And so just having this lightness and this openness of being is always nice. And I think the more we think we control, the more we suffer, because most things are really out of our hands. Yeah. And there's something that you actually say a lot, which is amor fati, love your fate.
Amor fati, yeah.
Love your fate. Yes, that's the translation. Yes. What? So it's interesting to think about destiny and fate. Do you believe in an actual fate, and do you believe you're engaging in it through your decision-making abilities?
I don't believe in like a predetermined destiny or something, but I believe that everything which is right now here is true. And it has to be like that. And that means that if for some reason my body decides to develop cancer one day, I will be like, okay, let's go, let's do it, let's see what's happening now. What are my choices? What is it doing with me? And I feel like the reason why I like this quote so much is because it comes from Friedrich Nietzsche, which also became insane at the end, and nobody really knew why. Maybe back then they didn't have the proper tools to really see it, but I also don't think that it was his choice to all of a sudden become insane, because he was a genius. But amor fati really served him until the end, because with all the fucking shit happening to him, he was still somehow winging it, and I really like that, the idea of really love your own faith, and to also be proactive about life. I believe that you are the creator of your own reality. And for me, proactivity goes until the very end of life, where I actually feel very connected with the Inuits or the Eskimos when they jump into the ice, when they feel complete, when they're 80, 90 years old. They don't wait until they die. They actually say, like, you know what, today is the day where I love my faith and I'm gonna jump into the ice, and that's fucking it. So that's for me like a very chainless way to die.
I'm controlling the way I die.
Yeah.
The Indians say, maybe you love it. The Indians say this, which is like, the way you live is the way you'll die. And I think what you like about the Eskimos and the way they die is the fact that, like, no, this is what I want and I'm choosing it.
Yeah.
And yeah, to live in a way of integrity, and the fact that when we're not making our own decisions, life will make them for us. And on a greater level than that, when you're really in flow with life, there are no decisions to be made and it's all happening just divinely. That's not always the reality. We can hope and dream.
The question is always what you're optimizing for. When you ask that question before, it literally solves every maze, because you can go flow state for a year if you want, if you optimize for uncertainty and complete surrender, right? But if you optimize for anything else, which you have almost like an intention for, like if you optimize in a relationship, if you optimize for healthy marriage, flow state won't be helping at some point. You will actually have to probably at some point be conscious about certain decisions, and the intimacy and like.
So the thing with flow state is not like a always happening phenomena. And so the fact that we can't be in flow state all the time. Yeah. And so when we are, it's this beautiful thing that is short-lived. And most of the time we're not in flow state, actually.
Let's challenge that. I want to live in flow state 24/7. Assets 24/7. Up to dose.
Oh my God. I feel like we could talk for 8 more hours.
Easy.
Let's do it another day, though.
2 non-agreeable people talking. Yeah.
Oh, I just want to say, thank you. And that it's been so great getting to know you and becoming your friend. And I'm excited for more discussions, more memories, more understanding.
Yeah, more awareness and more feelings.
More observe.
Namaste.
Namaste. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.